Thank you for listening, and don't forget to share this episode and subscribe. Joining me today is global executive coach and development expert Sheila Carmichael. She uses her background in HR to help her clients become their best selves. Thanks for being on the show today, Sheila.
Thank you for having me, John.
So I always ask this question just to start off, like how did you become who you are today? And maybe share some of your backstory, your history in terms of career aspirations, growing up, and maybe the journey along the way.
Yes, no, well, we have just a short time, so I'll give you the Twitter version. How's that?
Definitely. That's great.
My career really began in corporate environments, so working for various corporations, and it's interesting because it started off in their accounting and financial area. So it was a skill, but not necessarily a passion. And somehow I transitioned over into the HR arena. And from there, it just accelerated between training and developing leaders to organizational development, succession planning. And I really found my niche around talent management and continue to fuel my corporate career success from that. I noticed that while I was doing that in between different transitions, sometimes you continue to work for companies for 30 years and sometimes you shift and you adjust to support your success in your career. And I noticed during one of those transitions, there was a pivotal moment for the internal coach to start asking herself the question she would always ask leaders, what is it that you really want to do? What do you love and what do you love doing? And it kept coming back to coaching and supporting others' success, whether it was internally or externally. So during one of those transitions from one corporation to not knowing where I was going to go, I decided to put an anchor into how about being a coach? How about really getting the training for that and really getting grounded? And what was so interesting, a company dangled a really nice uh, offer and package, and it involved doing something I love, and I love doing supporting careers. So I went and worked with the international company, and then of course during that transition had to revisit that question. Now, what are we going to do when we grow up? And decided to go back to that and just really get deeper into it. And during some life uh, experiences, caregiving for parents and supporting them in their final stages of life, another carrot came out. So things happen when you really do put out there, what do you want? What do you love? What are you excited about? What are you engaged in? And so I worked with another Fortune, 50 company, and then decided, maybe it's just time for me to go ahead and stick with my passion from helping a much broader perspective as a coach and really narrowing in around the executive levels. So that's kind of the in a nutshell, a little over than a Twitter 400 word count, character count, but just really always knowing that I enjoy watching the light bulbs go off in others, that proverbial light bulb, that development of others and helping them to excel in what they want to accomplish. That's always been at my core. So how did I know I want to do this? I think was your question. It just was always there and making sure that whatever role, position, job, it supported that. It kept energizing me around that.
And that's amazing to hear because I actually started my career in sales, which was always
Mhm.
about serving others, listening,
Mhm.
creating a solution that provides value that people want to
Yes.
buy, right? And HR is very similar because you're dealing with people's livelihood. And this is a
Yes.
career, and you're not just listening and asking and probing, but you're also trying to get the best out of the people to match with the company that you're, you know, hired to really fill the roles for, right? So, and then on top of that, evolution of ensuring that they grow and they develop to different skill sets and different positions along the way. So I really understand HR. I understand how important it is and vital for a lot of these larger organizations. How has it transitioned for you? Because you were always doing corporate, right? To
Yes.
then being now a solopreneur, entrepreneur, to to try to hit the same kind of people, but on a smaller scale, because you probably were doing it at such a large volume, at so many,
Mhm.
deliverables and so many people, and going through all the resumes and everything coming at you, to now sourcing out your own leads and doing it yourself. Um, how was that transition for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Remember, I said I had started this once and did kind of a soft launch, and then was enticed by other things to go back to that corporate environment. And the things that I learned was, a couple of things. You have a lot of resources and things internally, but you also were building relationships and connections while working in those corporate environments. So when I decided to, okay, let's officially hard launch this again, I just leaned on those relationships. And what's interesting is that people started asking me, well, we were just waiting for you to do this, so that we can bring you in. Those relationships that I had built and supporting those leaders and executives with aligning their talent and the organizational needs and the business objectives with the right people doing the right roles, they took that as a value for them while I was in the same work environment. And then, of course, their careers took them in other places too. And so they remembered that and would reach out. So my lead funneling, I guess, as you would call it, is a little different than what some may think of. Those relationships that I built, um, showing up as true and authentic in those circumstances and situations, and really challenging their thought process, they were reminded of that. So they started then reaching back out to me, knowing that I could now provide this for them as an external resource. So when you ask the question, now, how do I go out there and seek those folks? um, they actually seek me,
That's
which
amazing.
is awesome.
No, it's a great position to be at, because you put in your time, and then
Yes,
you put your reputation on the line by showing up and doing what you're asked to do in a corporate environment. And then they remember,
yes,
right? And that's the
yes,
whole point of just being who you are. Like, you're tasked at that level as an HR, VP or whoever it may be, to do what you're supposed to do. And people remember the people and the relationships
yes,
along the way. And
yes,
I love the fact that, at the beginning it was a soft launch, then you got recruited to then do it a full launch, but then it's the everlasting of growing. But being independent now, how has that transition changed your trajectory in terms of entrepreneurship, business ownership? And then, of course, you were so used to corporate, to then
yeah.
having no stability, to then kind of start your own kind of adventure and journey.
Yeah, no, it's another fabulous question, John. When you think about it, I really didn't understand fully the resources I had when I was inside the corporate structure. When you're in the throes of that, you always think you don't have enough budget, you don't have enough this and that, all of that. And then when you come out of it, there's a discovery of, wow, I had a ton of resources. And so that is a transition. Whereas you could easily, when you think about pre-pandemic times, go to a coffee bar or water cooler, or just knock on an office door and hey, can I run some ideas by you? You have to do that differently when you're running your own shop. You have to be more intentional and more strategic about that, so that it's not coming across kind of like a salesy thing. You're still trying to build and sustain the relationships. So that's something that you really do, when you think about doing differently, the shift and the transition, the mindset of where to go to get the things you need to support what you're trying to accomplish. It's more collaborative, I believe, in a corporate environment, because you're all anchoring around the corporate vision and mission and principles and values, and everybody's on board with that. And when you decide to do this entrepreneurial step, it's really it can feel like a solopreneur step. So strategically laying out, where are those resources and how do you continue to sustain those to support what you need, as well as supporting what others are trying to do too.
And it's the lifestyle choice too, right? So I
Yes.
I look at like where you're at in your journey in life. There's career aspirations, there's corporate, and then there's going to be jumping around, right? To discover yourself, to then be a point
Yes.
where you're at, to then try something new that always was your passion, right? How long has
Yes.
it been since you left that corporate world, and how excited are you today to have made that jump or not?
You know, it's there are days in which I'm like, yeah. And there are moments where I'm like, whew, did I did I really make the right decision on this? And I think that what keeps me grounded, I mean, you have those days when you're working inside a corporate work environment too, right? You're going to have days that you love, and you're going to have days that are a little frustrating and can be somewhat annoying. What keeps me grounded, both whether it was internal or external, you know, you made a point around a comment around, you know, working in corporate and then working in your own world. I like to look at it a little different, John. I know who I am, and I am someone who I enjoy helping people to think differently about how they're looking at things, whether it's their leadership, their teams, their organizational structure, whatever it might be. And so it's that tethering to knowing what I bring in my value to what you're trying to accomplish. So that really wasn't that much of a difference whether I'm doing it in-house or whether I'm doing externally from a different, you know, angle. It's still the same thing. The things that have really changed about that is the access to it. You have it more readily when you're inside the organization and you decide, hey, can you have a minute to chat, or you schedule things quite easily because you're all on the same system. But when you're external to that, it just takes a little bit more effort. But if you remember your purpose and your reasoning, your why and your passion, then for me, it wasn't really that much of a strange shift as much as it was just being more intentional and deliberate, strategic about how to still apply the same talents that I was doing internally that I now do externally. I hope that helps with.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask, like, how has the passion changed and evolved from when you wanted to leave corporate to then living it currently? Because there's always,
Yeah,
everyone thinks it's always easier than you think,
yeah,
right? And then when you're actually doing it, it's lonely, it's challenging, you're spending more hours than ever, and you start thinking and doubting yourself, and you're kind of wondering, well, I had a stable employee job with benefits and
yes,
pension and whatever it is, and I had social circle, right? And I had access and all
mhm,
this stuff that it's the comfort level. To then do it
mhm.
yourself, it's a big risk for a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners. So, how did you feel when that happened? And how do you think differently today than when you left?
No, it's a great question. The first time I did it, it was a lot of lessons learned with it. I will be quite transparent and honest. I did not thoroughly think through a lot of different things to what you just talked about, the social aspect, the financial aspect, the resource aspect, all those different things. The second time, because of the learning on the first, the second time was like, okay, before I make this decision, let's put these checkers now in place. What do you need from a social perspective? And how will you get that differently than what you had when you were internally? What do you need to ensure financially? Because to your point, you get really comfortable when that paycheck is hitting your account every 2 weeks, or you know, however the cadence of that is. And so how are you prepared for those highs and lows of the financial flow into your bank account, right? And then as far as your resources, how do you go about that differently? So, you know, do all companies jump out the gate the first time, those entrepreneurs the first time, very successful and hit the ground running? There may be some. I'm sure there are. They probably checked their markers and made sure holistically the finances were in place for this to cover, you know, those highs and lows. The relationships are sustainable to support and encourage and fuel your passion. The resources and the access to those things. What are you doing? So when you strategically, you know, a business plan may be more about the financials, but you really do have to consider those other aspects and components as an entrepreneur, because you don't realize that until you step on it and you say, "Oh, wait a minute, this month wasn't so good financially. So where's the buffer to cover that? This month wasn't as strong with the business development. So what's the plan to recover from that?" You really are using that same corporate mindset. You're just taking that and now working it for yourself more independently.
Yeah, and I love you explaining that in detail because as an entrepreneur business owner, you're skilled at one component of the realm of 10
Yes.
other pillars that's required. Like I was always a sales rep when I first started this agency, and now I'm in charge of operations, HR, accounting, as well as everything from fulfillment, the service, leadership, management, training, you name it. And there's so much involved that's overwhelming, especially if you don't have that it factor for all of it, right? So therefore, you need to hire people that are skilled, that are in alignment with your values and everything else. And that's the skill set that's not talked about as well, especially if you want to grow and scale and be a little bit bigger. But again, it all
Yes.
depends on where you want to be and in your
Mhm.
organization, entrepreneurial journey, right? And where do you see yourself and where do you want to be in like 5, 10 years?
No, it's another great question. It's a question I ask myself daily. Because things may shift and change. And it's no different than a corporation saying, okay, what's our strategic plan for this year or for the next 3 years? So you're adopting that same type of philosophy in your own business. As far as currently, where I'm at in my stage personally as well as professionally, it's like a re-ramp, and it's a restart, and it's an evolving of that. And so as far as the scalability of that, I'm literally in a process of some strategic planning with some partners to help with, okay, what are some things we can do around scaling? And to your point, you don't have those resources. So what's not your wheelhouse, or as a coworker of mine used to say, that's my jam, right? So what's not your jam in your wheelhouse, then that's an indicator you probably need to outsource it. You need to know enough about it so that you can monitor it and make sure that your vision is being communicated clearly for others to meet that expectation, so that this way you can play to what's in your wheelhouse and your jam and the areas that really do support your passion. I love individuals like yourself who are natural sales folks, because that's not my jam. That's not my wheelhouse. So I know to leverage those individuals to help support me in those areas of business development, because that's not something that really um, gets me too excited. It's almost heavy thinking about it, but it feels lighter when I know that I can identify the folks who will support the vision to help generate that business development side of the other business. So where do I see myself? The second part of your question, today it's Sheila kind of solo with a lot of different resources that I contract in for specialties. Tomorrow, in the future, I think that there will still be an opportunity for that, maybe at a broader perspective. I think the workplace itself as a whole is shifting and changing. We may see even more. There's been research and reports and books written about how the workforce is changing more heavily in contractual work than from a full-time and employee experience. So I'm hoping that that will continue to grow as my business grows. Who knows? It may be that there's a whole organization for that. Is that a desire? Not particularly. I think there's some stresses and strains that can come along with that. I want to still stay grounded and attached to some of that at the ground level. That was one of the things I really enjoyed when I was in corporate, that I could play strategically and still get some of the realities of what's going on at a couple levels lower. So I don't think I want to be, I know I don't want to be like the CEO of a Fortune 100 company. It's a lot of pressure. That's not Sheila's personal desire. But I do want to help others continue to help me and help them with their passions of growing, whether it's with my business or as a client. That was a mouthful, I'm sure.
Well, personal branding is important, right? And it'll get you to to an extent where if you want to grow in terms of size or growth in terms of revenue, you need to take some additional actions, right? And
Right.
I guess it'll come with time because ultimately it's your
Mhm.
personal success and goals and aspirations. Um, so if you don't mind, like I was
Mhm.
curious, like, did you have this coaching mentality, or was there other coaches that transpired you to become one yourself? Like, why did you always want to be a coach as opposed to, um, starting a business or doing another
Mhm.
venture altogether?
Yeah. No, it's another, it's one of those questions that makes you think about who you actually are, you know, and why are you going and stepping into this particular area? What's drawing and pulling you into it? And so when I think about the roles that I've played over my career, you're right. I could have chose talent management consultant. I could have chose organizational development consultant. I could have chose, training and development consulting. I could have chose any one of those things that I had played in. But the reason for honing in on the coaching then slash consultant or then slash an author or whatever it might be is because of what it did for me and the alignment to who I was in my core. So even while consulting around, succession planning and management, even while consulting around the process of the employee life cycle and talent management or consulting around training and development and facilitating programs, what was always at the core was the area of a partnering with folks to help with exploring options and possibilities and to help really maximize the talents that they bring, which is the essence of coaching. So even if I'm working with an executive or CEO and trying to figure out what's really going on here and how do we resolve this, I'm always anchored back to that point you mentioned a lot, curiosity, to help with them formulating it versus me having to come up with it. So that was always the core, and that's what kept pulling me in. And I said, well, why would I do these other things if at the core, what really was fueling my success was my natural abilities as a coach?
Mm,
That's where I need to step into. That's what I need to identify with.
gotcha. And then I was gonna ask you, is there a specific niche industry or segment in terms of the executives that you focus in on? Because Fortune 500, Fortune 100 or 50, it's a very broad scope of verticals, industries, and marketplaces, right? So, is there a segment that you specialize in, and um, how did you come about figuring that out?
Yeah, no, it's another great question. My segment is not like a product or business that, that says, hey, we know this is the consumer profile. This is the persona of our targeted audience that we're going after because of the product. My targeted audience isn't based on their size of the organization. It isn't based on if it's for profit, nonprofit, or mutual holding company. It is based on the actual tier of the individual. So those areas doesn't matter. But if it's at the tier, you figure if tier one is the CEO, so the first and second tier being that C suite. And then you come down to the next third and fourth tier, which those are uh, lines of business leaders, right? The executives over those areas. When you think about first line leaders, that's not who I'm targeting. However, that doesn't mean if someone says, hey, Sheila, I need this help, if it's because they're aspiring, they're a middle manager and they're aspiring to those ranks. So those are already established in executive ranks and wanting to really elevate their game, elevate their presence, elevate their influence, right? Or those who are saying, God, I really want to get up there. I so want to be the next executive that people are looking to me to have a broader stretch of influence. Then that's my particular niche. Those are the individuals who I'm looking at. Maybe you were newly appointed and you're like, I thought this was one thing, and now I'm discovering it's something else. Right? Something else is going on here. That's the area that I'm looking at. That first tier down to about the fourth tier. And organizations are structured a little differently. So it may be first to four slash fifth tier of the organization where you're really trying to enhance and improve and accelerate your game as a key influencer of your organization to drive results. those are the individuals I'm looking at. That's my niche.
And then, thank you for that. And I wanted to also ask you, like, how has it worked out for you in terms of not just the pivot, but then the freedom of choice, freedom of time,
Mhm.
freedom of lifestyle? Uh, How has that transition been versus the corporate lifestyle? Because I used to work in corporate before I started this
Yeah.
agency, and now I'm trying to create a culture that embodies an essence of entrepreneurship plus corporate to the extent of my values, right? So I would love to hear
Yeah.
your kind of ideas upon that.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. You're right. So when you're in corporate, right, you know what your PTO days are, all these little things that you say, oh, there are restrictions on my freedom and autonomy and what I can do and what I can't do. And you've got your performance objectives laid out for the year, and you're supposed to hit these targets and everything. I say all of that because it's a structure to help you operate within that culture, to your point, right? And when you're an entrepreneur or solopreneur or running your own agency, so to speak, you now get to define that. And there are pros and cons to that. You may have some flexibility. You have all the flexibility in your decision making authority now, right? But now the checkers of, are these the right decisions and are they lining up? You're really having to think through that a little bit more as far as bouncing them against. So there are, it may look greener on the entrepreneurial side of the field, but there are challenges with it as well. Just like the corporate area has its challenges. So it's really, when you think about the organization in a corporate environment, is being guided by that top senior leadership vision, missions, stakeholders, shareholders, all those individuals that are investing in that vision. When you think about what's your vision and what you hope for, who are your key stakeholders and members and your own identified board members to help you stay true and accountable to what your vision and mission and purpose is. So you definitely need to define that. You definitely need to get some clear understanding of that so that you are staying true to what you're trying to accomplish in your business. No
So,
different than corporate. You're
oh yeah.
just doing it differently.
So I just have a couple questions remaining, Sheila, regarding some of the pillars in life, right? As you mentioned, you had to take some
Mhm.
time off and care for your parents. You also made that pivot. How important is some of the other pillars in your life, like family, community, impact, legacy, all this other stuff that people always talk about, right? But really, as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur, it's different because until you live it and you breathe it and you're in it, you cannot
Yeah.
explain how it is. And unless it's like parenthood. Like if you have children,
Mhm.
you cannot explain to a single person how parenthood is when you don't sleep at night, you get kicked in the middle of the night, and all these other things that you have to deal with. So, would you be able to explain, share with us some of that?
Yeah, John, those pillars you mentioned are spot on. Many times we only think of the top ones, right? The financials, the family, but there's other elements that we're learning more and more that are even equally important. Your self-care. It's one thing, health, and it's, are you physically fit? But the self-care, not only physically, but mentally, the compassion for self, all these different things to ensure that they're in line and balance, so to speak. There's not one area of any pillar that you're defining your success as. So when you mentioned success earlier too, I want to just weave back to that. You know, success is defined by how you define it and not letting others' interpretation of their success be yours and staying true to that. So for someone who has a family and their children are young, well, their pillar for family is going to look quite different than for someone like myself who doesn't have children. And what does that family mean to me? And what's driving me around legacy for someone with children to someone who doesn't? For me, it's around my niece That's my legacy that I'm looking at, right? And it's for the community. And it's not to say those things don't apply for someone else. It's just how they're positioned and how you're defining that particular pillar, because that's how the success is being defined. You're defining that. And then what's also interesting, John, is that as you continue, I have this running statement that folks find humorous. As you get to different floors of life, right? When you're in your 20s, those pillars look different than when you're in your 30s, on the third floor, and then on the fourth floor, and the fifth floor, and so on. And each step on that floor, something happens internally with you. And your values are probably the same. They just make it weighted and prioritized a little differently. And so always revisiting that, because the way you're thinking today on the floor that you're at and the step within that floor is probably going to be a little different, and it's dictating how you're defining each of those pillars that are important for you.
It's totally understandable. I love how you defined that and broke it down, because I look at when I was in my early teens to 20s to 30s, 40s, and I spent a lot of time with 50, 60, 70, 80-year olds as well to get really good insight, wisdom, and their perspective on life, not just in business success, but in life success, health,
Yes.
legacy, whatever wealth is all about. What about success? And I'm always trying to understand. That's where the curiosity comes from, right? And I am always trying to figure out, like, what makes you you? How do you
Yes.
differentiate yourself? And it's all individualized and personalized. So I get it. And no one should be trying to mimic exactly what you do, because they don't go through
No.
and don't have an idea of what you've gone through. And
Yes.
and that's the whole purpose of life, right? Make it, personalize it to your own interest. And people are always chasing and following and aspiring to be that person on social media or Instagram or whatever. And I'm like, just live your own with
Yes.
intent, have clarity on what you want and aim for it, right? And grow. And yes, you're gonna fail a lot of times. It's what you do when you do fail and overcome it, right? And as an entrepreneur, you experienced it in your first time around, to now have better awareness, more strategy behind it, with more intent and purpose to make it not fail again, right? Because you know what it felt like, and now you're gonna make amends on ensuring it doesn't fail the second time.
Yes, absolutely. I can't help, my coach hat is on. So it's a question that comes to mind when you say, there are times where you're looking and comparing because you see others doing these things and you go, wow, I want to be able to do that, or I want to be the next, CEO of like an Apple or Microsoft or whatever it might be, right? Because they're doing so good. Tim's doing so good. These people are doing so good. Or maybe it's Sir Richard Branson, whoever it is that you're admiring. I won't say idolizing or mimicking, but there's something about what they're doing that's resonating internally for you. So Coach Sheila is asking you to think about, if you didn't have any of those things, those are just reference points. What will you define for you? What will you define as your key purpose and point of life? What does that mean for you when you look at all those areas and aspects of your success? And how do you show up demonstrating that? Because that's what people will remember. You can't be anyone else. And like, to your point, your journey, your experiences, your successes, the hiccups, the excitements, the joys, the letdowns, everything defines you so distinctively, so uniquely, that no one else has that to offer. So it would be better to put the aspiration and goal and purpose on that with clear definition, because that's what's going to fuel your success. You will not be able to sustain mimicking somebody else. That'll get you going in the beginning, but it won't last. It definitely won't last. It'll get frustrated by it. But when you know that you are living your true voice and your true purpose, your true motives, your intentions, So when things are coming up against it, and you're thinking, no, that should I or shouldn't I, having all these self doubts, if you anchor back to who you truly want to be for you, then all those decisions are really made much easily. They're made more confidently, right? And it doesn't matter. It just really doesn't matter because you're staying true to you.
And that's a great point, Sheila. I love it. You know, be intentional, be mindful, and have clarity on like your purpose, your life, and be in control of it. And if there's growth along the way, if there's hiccups, then make changes, pivot, or create change and make it a habit, right? Like there's things that you can
Yes.
improve on. And there's so many doubts, and people are always, yeah, I read a lot of biographies and I pick one or two bullets out of it to make some changes in my life to see if it adapts to my my vision and my goals, right? But it might not stick. So, and it's okay because I'm
Right.
always adapting and pivoting and changing and trying, and and that's how life is, right? Like life is so
Right.
short. People think it's 80, 90 years, but it's gonna fly by. So you're gonna make the most out of it. And if you don't take
Yeah.
action, like going with a coach or going fulfilling your dream, lifelong dream, like you're gonna live with regret, right? And it's like the same thing when maybe you are married or not. If you wanted to get married and you didn't pull the plug, that's a big doubt and regret you're going to have, right? These are things that you're going to live with for the rest of your life. So might as well live it
Right.
with purpose and intent. So I love that, Sheila.
Yes. Yes. You're reminding me of life is just this huge experimental journey we're going through when you think about it. And the more that we give ourselves permission to experiment and have fun, and even along the way, if we have a discovery of, ooh, note to self, probably shouldn't do that again. That's where the growth comes in, right? And the discomfort from that, like, why did that feel? And really asking yourself those hard questions, why is that word or that phrase or that style of that particular leader that you're admiring, why is that resonating for you? Why is that resonating on your vibe? Why is it speaking specifically to you? And when you ask yourself those questions, like, what about that's pulling on me? That helps you then with definitions for defining a new experiment to test. And then after that test, you can go, wow, that was really great. I need to keep that going. Or giving yourself permission to go, that test didn't work out so good. So I need to let that go and let it go. Don't like, why did I do that and dwell over it? But it was a learning experiment. It helped you, it formed you, and it kept feeding into the things that are really, truly, resonating and vibing with what you're trying to really do.
And I know that I read this all the time. It's like living as present as possible, living intentful, and making sure that you live for the moment. Don't live in the
Mhm.
past, don't live in the future, live for the moment, be present. And a lot of people get distracted. They get overwhelmed. There's too many emails, too many social posts, too many people calling, too many meetings. You got to show up and be intentful and prepared. And the more you're intentional, and this is something that I started doing maybe 3 years ago, I put the most important thing in my calendar right off the bat, which is family. All my family obligations with my child, my wife, and meetings and family obligations. Then comes, some of the work stuff, but monthly workshops with the team. That is the second most important thing. My people within the team, then the clients, right? People forget the people that got you where you are people you should really spend more time with and reward, right? With your time. And therefore,
Yes.
people do different things. I get it. But for me, it's like my family comes first. And then, of course, my friends
Yeah.
are there too. But it's just organizing your life to what's important and making an alignment, right? With if it's work right now, you don't have a huge family or you're not there yet, then put work at the top of it, right? Of that calendar
Right.
and that pillar, but acknowledge where you're at in your lifespan to then figure out what's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's something I would call like your own personal assessment that you're doing, your own personal life assessment. Because where you spend your time and attention, your space and your energy, people will pick up on that probably quicker than you even realize that you're doing it yourself. And so when you're intentional about doing that, you know, Stephen Covey Sr., Once Upon a Time, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, right? It's still here today. And there's a section in there way back when we used to do that programming in person, a 3-day thing. There was a section that was called Putting First Things First, and it's morphed into other titles today. But he said exactly what you just talked about, these big rocks that are important for you. Place those first weekly, and then the space that's left over, those are the fillers. Those are the things that if they don't get to, it's okay. But remember, you've got your big rocks that are important for you first. Make sure you stay committed to those. Those are the things that are going to keep you energized and keep you focused and aligned to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I always remember this, which is, people are always chasing for more wealth, more money, more, status,
Yeah.
whatever salary. But I I talk to a lot of people in their 70s and 80s, and it's all about wisdom, right?
Right.
So it's all about the relationships and the experiences that people really connect with. And if you spend more
Mhm.
time living presently and not chasing and doing things that you think you should be doing and focusing on what
Mhm.
really matters, which is slowing down, spending real time with real people and having real conversations, going and doing things that you're never gonna experience and have a good experience, like let restaurant trips, whatever it may be. You have choice and access, right? Do things, and therefore you're not gonna live without regret, right? And that's what I love dealing with the elderly as well as the younger people, just so that I have a good perspective in life. And it's been fortunate for me, and I'm very lucky to the sense that I have access to a lot of people, right? That don't have
Mhm.
access to people that I respect, have
Mhm.
followed their footsteps and kind of admire and be able to host a podcast, which a lot of people don't even understand how to do it or don't have the courage to start it, right? I have the ability to
Mhm.
at least connect and have a great conversation with yourself, Sheila, without living
Yeah.
with regret. So it's great.
Yes. I love that. Again, depending on where you are in life, what floor and what step, the things that are going on in your space, you know, it will then decide. Let me say that you have that conscious choice capability to decide if that's what you really want to do. And so as you progress on higher floors, you look back on the previous floors and you kind of go, I did that for a reason with no regret. And sometimes I did that. I had my reason and I regret that I did that. But when you get to, you know, the final stages of your life journey, what is it that you want? That's that legacy. What is it that you want people to have known you for? And how are you staying consistent for that? So I think when I hear you say those who are at a more senior stage in life, right? They've looked back over the years, and I saw this with my own parents, and they had key principles that they were firm about, and they instilled those into my brother and I, and they never wavered on it because that was what they wanted as their legacy, right? So I would offer to anyone listening to this podcast, we're all going to be at different stages in our life journey, career, personally, professionally. What is it that you want when it comes to that point of the final stages of your professional and personal journey that you want people to be able to speak of, to know of, to feel of when they say Sheila Carmichael, or when they say, John Wong? I don't know if I'm saying your name accurately, but whatever it is that you want them, what is it that you want folks to know that you have left? What impression of you? And how that happens. A mentor way back in my early stages of my career said to me when I was this road warrior for training and development, and I was like, I got to get all these done and like nonstop. That was the big rock for me. how many classes can I get done to support what we were trying to do and get as many and exceed those expectations and those goals? Why, yeah, all of that. And she said to me, I never saw on anyone's tombstone that I wish I had stayed longer at work. I've never seen this written on anyone's tombstone. So God forbid if something should happen to you and you're on that flight and you're running all over the world with this, is that what you want people to remember you by? That you were the road warrior? That was such a pivotal moment for me. That was like that, no, that's not what I want people to remember me by. And so I just pay that forward. Our mentors, the people in our village, our family, our friends, our clients, our partnerships, all of them are there strategically and intentionally to give you the things that you need to help you to stay anchored to who you really are. What is it that you need to listen to keep you grounded to that? What are your actions that you need to put forward to help support that? It's a coach thing. It's what I do. I want people to really get grounded on what they want for themselves so that they're not conforming or mimicking and, code shifting and all these crazy things, because is that the memory you want for folks? I don't think it is. I mean, if it is, okay, but I really believe that it's not. I think it's something bigger. I think it's something more powerful.
Well, thanks a lot, Sheila. This has been really, really fun. Great conversation. Hopefully, the listeners got a lot out of this. How can some of the listeners get in touch with you? I know it's going to be in show notes, but if you don't mind sharing, uh, maybe your website, email, or any of your.
Yes, yes, absolutely. My website is Transitions D to D, and that's plural transitions, the letter D, number 2, and D.com. The reason for that is because I think we all have to go through some discoveries before we can make some decisions around that. So that's what the D to D is. So it's transitionsd2d.com. And you can contact me via email, Sheila at transitionsd2d.com, or even just hello at SheilaCarmichael.com. They both will get you to me one way or another. I'm also on LinkedIn, Sheila Carmichael. I show up just like I look today, so it'll be easy to find me. I would love to hear and have a chat with anyone that's at that point where they're going, I need those questions to help me kind of think differently the way I'm currently thinking and get regrounded to who I'm truly trying to be. So I would welcome that.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot. It's going to be on the show notes. And it was a pleasure an honor to have you on this episode. And thank you again, Sheila.
Oh, the pleasure was truly, John, all mine. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to many and to personally connect with you. So enjoyed it.